There is a powder that costs $3 and fixes any frozen, stuck, or stiff lock in 30 seconds. Not temporarily loosens it until the temperature drops again and it freezes solid. Not requires a locksmith call out at 2 in the morning in January when the temperature is minus 15 and your key will not turn. Permanently eliminates the friction and ice formation inside the lock mechanism so that the lock operates smoothly at any temperature through any weather. For 5 years or more from a single application. The same frozen front door lock that has defeated your key every winter morning. The same padlock on your garden shed that requires 3 minutes of wiggling and a prayer every time you need to open it. The same door handle lock that stiffens in August humidity and sticks in February cold. All of them permanently resolved with 30 seconds and a $3 tube that every locksmith carries in their service bag. And that every locksmith hopes you will not discover before your next frozen lock. Emergency generates a $150 call-out fee. The global locksmith services market generates over $3 billion in annual revenue in the United States alone. The lock lubrication product market generates several hundred million more from branded lock sprays and lubricants sold at hardware stores. Both revenue streams depend on one manufactured reality, that people believe WD-40 is the correct lubricant for locks. Apply WD-40 to their locks, and then call a locksmith 6 months later when the lock fails completely because WD-40 destroyed the mechanism. WD-40 is not a lock lubricant. It never was. Every locksmith certification course explicitly teaches new locksmiths that WD-40 is harmful to pin tumbler mechanisms. And then those same certified locksmiths go to work and never correct the consumer belief that WD-40 is the appropriate lock maintenance product. Because correcting that belief would eliminate the service calls that WD-40's destruction of lock mechanisms generates. The correct lock lubricant is graphite powder, a dry, conductive, self-lubricating mineral that coats the precision machined surfaces, without collecting the dust, grit, and rust particles that any oil-based lubricant accumulates over time. It costs $3 for a tube at any hardware store. One tube applied correctly lasts 5 years. And this is the story of the dry lubricant that English locksmiths used as the standard maintenance material from the 16th century, until the petroleum lubricant industry convinced 2 generations of homeowners that the correct response to any friction problem was WD-40. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. Subscribe and hit the bell right now. This channel opens the vaults they spent decades locking. Now let me take you back to where this all begins. Let me take you back to 16th century England and the locksmithing trade guilds of London. The pin tumbler lock, the fundamental design principle underlying virtually every cylinder lock in use today, was not invented by Linus Yale Jr. in the 1860s. It was described in principle by the English natural philosopher Robert Hooke in the 1670s, and pin tumbler mechanisms existed in ancient Egyptian and Roman forms. English craft locksmiths of the 16th and 17th centuries maintained complex iron locks for wealthy households, and understood that lubrication required a dry lubricant. While oil-based lubricants attracted and retained the fine metallic dust produced by key to cylinder contact and airborne grit that entered through keyways. Over months of use, an oil-lubricated lock accumulated a sticky composite that restricted pin movement until the lock became difficult to operate or failed entirely. Dry graphite applied to the keyway and cylinder eliminated this accumulation problem because graphite does not retain contaminants. Its crystal structure is a layered arrangement of carbon atoms in which adjacent layers slide against each other with minimal friction. When graphite coats a metal surface, it provides lubrication through this interlayer sliding rather than through the viscous resistance reduction of an oil film. Contaminant particles do not embed in the lubricant. They rest on the surface and are expelled from the mechanism by the key's movement. English locksmiths passed the graphite practice through guild apprenticeship traditions. Every apprentice learned to finish with graphite and why oil was never used. This knowledge remained the professional standard for 400 years until the mid-20th century. Then a combination of factors buried it in the professional archive and handed the consumer market to the petroleum lubricant industry. Next time your lock sticks, remember the ancient wisdom of the London guilds. Reach for the graphite, not the oil. Now, let me show you exactly why this works and why WD-40 destroys locks. Because understanding both halves of this comparison changes everything. A pin tumbler lock cylinder contains a precisely machined barrel with a series of vertical channels containing a spring-loaded driver pin and a key pin. When the correct key is inserted, each key pin is pushed to a precise height, aligning all pin pairs at the shear line. The plug rotates, the cam retracts the bolt, and the lock opens. This mechanism operates on tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Any contamination that increases friction in the pin channels or adheres to the pin surfaces directly impairs this precision movement. WD-40 is a petroleum distillate mixture originally formulated as a water displacement compound for protecting metal surfaces from moisture and corrosion. Its primary solvent components have a viscosity that allows them to penetrate into tight metal-to-metal clearances. Initially providing some lubrication, as the solvent evaporates over the following days, it leaves behind a residue of petroleum wax and oils. These residues are sticky. They collect the metallic dust, atmospheric grit, and contaminant particles that enter through the keyway. Over months, the accumulated residue mixture coats the pin surfaces with a thick, sticky deposit that progressively restricts pin movement. The lock becomes stiffer than before within 3 to 6 months. This is why WD-40 generates repeat service calls rather than eliminating them. Graphite powder lubricates by an entirely different mechanism. Graphite is a crystalline allotrope of carbon arranged in parallel hexagonal planes. When graphite contacts metal surfaces, individual planes slide against each other with a coefficient of friction dramatically lower than metal-on-metal contact. The graphite does not flow like an oil. It coats surfaces as a solid, dry layer. It does not attract contaminants because it is not sticky. Contaminant particles are expelled from the mechanism by the mechanical action of key insertion and rotation, as they cannot embed in the dry layer. For frozen locks, graphite prevents ice formation by displacing the moisture film that would otherwise freeze into ice bridges between pin surfaces. A graphite-coated lock cylinder maintains free movement at temperatures below -40 degrees because there is no moisture available for ice to form. So remember, for long-lasting lock precision and reliability, skip the spray and reach for the dry graphite powder every time. Now here is where the story takes the turn the lock service and petroleum lubricant industries have always hoped you would never reach. The locksmith call-out market generates over $3 billion in annual revenue in the United States. A significant fraction of this revenue comes from lock service calls for mechanisms that have become difficult to operate or have failed completely from improper lubrication. Specifically, from the WD-40 application that the customer believed was correct maintenance, WD-40 generates approximately $400 million per year in United States sales. A significant portion of its lock-related revenue comes from customers applying it to locks that subsequently fail, generating locksmith service calls. These calls eventually result in lock replacement rather than repair, because the contamination damage is easier to replace than to clean out of precision mechanisms. The damage cycle is elegant in its revenue generation. The consumer applies WD-40 to a stiff lock. The lock temporarily improves. Over 3 to 6 months, the residue accumulates contaminants, and the lock becomes stiffer than before. The consumer applies more WD-40. The cycle accelerates. Eventually, the lock fails completely or becomes so difficult to operate that the consumer calls a locksmith. The locksmith charges $150 to $300 to replace the lock. The graphite powder that eliminates this entire cycle costs $3. It eliminates the WD-40 purchase cycle because a single graphite application lasts 5 years. It eliminates the locksmith service call because the lock does not fail after graphite application. Graphite does not damage precision mechanisms. One $3 tube ends approximately $150 to $300 in avoided service costs from a single lock. But here's what the locksmith industry's professional silence about graphite cannot suppress. Because every locksmith certification program teaches graphite as the correct lock lubricant, and every experienced locksmith who has worked in the field for more than a few years has seen the WD-40 damage pattern enough times to understand the relationship clearly. The Associated Locksmiths of America, ALOA, the professional organization for American locksmithing, publishes technical guidance for its member locksmiths that explicitly lists graphite powder as the preferred lubricant for pin tumbler lock cylinders and explicitly warns against oil-based lubricants. This guidance is available to ALOA members and has been consistent across multiple editions of their technical reference materials. The locksmith community's knowledge of graphite as the correct lock lubricant is a professional open secret. Every experienced locksmith knows it. And the professional culture treats it as knowledge that belongs in the service van rather than in the consumer's hands, because knowledge eliminates service calls. A property manager in Chicago documented her building's transition from ad hoc maintenance to a systematic annual graphite application program in 2019. Before the program, the building averaged 4 to 6 locksmith service calls per year for stuck locks at an average cost of $175. After the graphite program, which she implemented in 2 hours using a $15 investment in graphite, the building went 18 months without a service call. Her total annual lock maintenance cost dropped from approximately $900 in service calls to approximately $15 in graphite powder. A wilderness guide in Montana documented a systematic comparison of graphite versus WD-40 for padlocks used on equipment storage. The graphite-treated padlocks operated freely throughout the temperature range, tested, including at -20 Fahrenheit. The WD-40 treated padlocks operated freely initially, but showed significant stiffness by the 3-month evaluation and required forced operation. The unlubricated padlocks showed baseline stiffness that worsened with temperature extremes. Stick to graphite for your lock maintenance. Here is exactly what to do. The complete lock lubrication protocol is simple, takes 30 seconds per lock, and produces results you will notice the first time you use the key after application. Here is what you need. Number 1. Graphite powder in a puffer tube applicator. Graphite lock lubricant is sold at hardware stores in small tubes, with a thin applicator nozzle designed to direct powder into the keyway. Brand names include Master Lock Graphite, Lock Lubricant, AGS Graphite Lock Lubricant, and several others. A standard tube costs $3 to $5 and contains enough graphite for 10 to 20 lock applications. Number 2, your key. The key is the application tool for distributing graphite throughout the cylinder. Here is the application protocol for a standard pin tumbler cylinder lock. Insert the thin applicator nozzle of the graphite tube into the keyway. Squeeze the tube several times to puff graphite powder into the keyway. You should see a small cloud of black powder inside the keyway. This is correct. Insert your key into the lock and operate it several times, inserting and removing completely and turning in both directions. The key movement distributes the graphite powder throughout the pin channels, coating the pin surfaces and channel walls with a dry lubricant layer. Remove the key and wipe the graphite residue from the key blade with a cloth. The lock mechanism is now lubricated. For padlocks, apply graphite to the keyway and also to the shackle and shackle receiver opening, as these are additional friction points. For frozen locks where the key cannot be inserted at all because ice has formed inside the cylinder, do not apply heat. To the lock body, heat cycling causes thermal expansion of the cylinder body that can permanently damage the alignment of the pin channels. Instead, warm your key using a lighter or a cup of hot water and insert the warm key into the frozen keyway. The key's warmth melts the ice bridge at the point of contact and allows gradual insertion. Once the key is fully inserted and operating freely, apply graphite immediately through the keyway before the mechanism refreezes. The graphite application after the ice is cleared prevents the moisture film that allows refreezing from forming on the metal surfaces. For preventive maintenance before winter, apply graphite to all exterior locks in October before freezing temperatures arrive. One application provides freeze protection through the winter season and into the following summer. Total annual lock maintenance cost for a standard home with 3 exterior locks using graphite, approximately $5 in graphite powder. Compare that to the $150 to $300 emergency locksmith call when the frozen lock that received WD-40 last year fails completely. The graphite does not attract moisture. The graphite does not collect grit. The graphite does not leave a sticky manifestation that accumulates contaminants. It coats the surfaces and stays there, layer upon layer of carbon planes sliding against each other. With a coefficient of friction that keeps your key turning smoothly whether the temperature is 90 degrees in August or minus 20 in January. Some knowledge does not disappear because it failed. It disappears because the emergency it prevents is worth more to the industry than the maintenance. The English Guild locksmith who finished every lock service with a graphite application and taught every apprentice why oil was never used in a lock. A mechanism was not protecting trade secrets. He was transmitting the practical knowledge that his craft required in order to serve his customers well. A lock that fails because the craftsman used the wrong lubricant reflects badly on the craftsman who serviced it. His commercial interest and his professional interest both aligned with using the correct material. The certified locksmith, who knows from his training that WD-40 damages locks and does not correct the consumer belief that WD-40 is appropriate, is making a different calculation. The consumer's continued belief in WD-40 for lock maintenance generates the service call that WD-40's damage eventually produces. Correcting the belief eliminates that service call. The professional knowledge and the commercial interest no longer align. The graphite stays in the service bag. WD-40 stays on the consumer's shelf. The lock fails in January. The locksmith answers the two in the morning call. The tube of graphite costs $3. The lock service call costs $175. The carbon in the graphite has been lubricating metal surfaces since before locksmiths existed to service them. It will still be lubricating metal surfaces long after the WD-40 can has rusted empty in someone's garage. Your front door lock does not know about the locksmith service call that its frozen mechanism would generate. It knows about the moisture film on its pin surfaces and the absence of graphite that would prevent that moisture from freezing. The graphite is at the hardware store. It costs $3. It has been the correct answer to a frozen lock since English Guild locksmiths first understood why oil created the problem it appeared to solve. If this vault changed how you look at the WD-40 can next to your front door, or the padlock on your garden shed that you fight with every morning, or the $150 emergency locksmith call you have been one cold snap away from, subscribe and share this with someone who deserves to know. The correct lock lubricant costs $3 and has been in the hardware store's lock care section the entire time. The next vault opens soon.